we have Melody Time, which is so similar to Make Mine Music that actually I'm sort of wondering why they didn't just call it Make Mine Music 2. I mean, it's almost identical. Different variations of songs, most of them modern, sung by modern singers, a little bit of poetry thrown in, and even some straightforward stories. It's pretty much the exact same thing. And just like Make Mine Music, this one works pretty good too. You do have your straightforward narrative, some of them more forgettable than others, but you also have your selections of straightforward music and even sometimes even straightforward poetry. The poem As Lovely as a Tree segment is especially nice. It's just the Disney animators drawing what they hear as the poem is read, with some nice soothing music thrown over it. It works pretty well. There's also a really cool section called Bumble Boogie, which reminds me a lot of the Pink Elephant sequence. It's just a bee flying around to a whacked out version of Flight of the Bumblebee as the music is literally trying to destroy him. It's really chaotic, at least it's some fun imagery. The one that probably stands out the most is the Johnny Appleseed one. When I was a kid, I really liked it. When I was a teenager, I got a little bit more cynical and started making fun of it. Now that I'm older, I actually find myself really liking it again. It's got some real heavy atmosphere, some real heavy visuals, and some of those backgrounds are just incredible. Yeah, it's still a little corny and I do make fun of it sometimes, but it still holds up. It's the size and scope that they give something that seems so relatively simple, and yet they show that it took so much dedication. That image of the apple trees becoming the clouds, that's one of the most surreal things I've ever seen. I remember it even stayed in my mind as a little kid, and it really, really is gripping. In fact, it's so good, it probably could have been its own movie. I'm sort of wondering why they tucked it away in here.
The Lord is good to me, and so I thank the Lord for giving me the things I need, the sun and rain and an apple seed. Yes, he's been good to me.
Funny bit of trivia, when I was a little kid in Catholic school, they actually had this as the prayer we said before grace. Isn't that weird? And they told us not to sing it too. How is that possible? You can't say these words without singing it. It can't be done. We did it anyway, and I'm sure God knew we were thankful for the grub. And then the last segment they end on is Pecos Bill, sung through a lot of folk and country music. This is also fun too and really creative, but again, why did they end the film on this? I mean, it's funny, it's enjoyable, and it's catchy, but dude, did you see the Appleseed one? I mean, that was far superior. Pecos Bill just ends on a, I don't even know what note. I'm not sure if it's sad, I'm not sure if it's happy, it's just kind of odd. Like I said, I don't have a problem with it, I just don't know why they closed on it. But either way, Melody Time has some really good shorts in it, as well as some good music and really great animation. The atmosphere is really heavy in this one. Again, maybe not Fantasia heavy, but there are points where it hits that traditional Disney charm that only Disney can have. And they recreate it quite well here. Melody Time is definitely one to check out.
The Lord is good to me.
So we went from a bunch of shorts to just two, to a bunch of shorts to just two again. Only this time there was a feeling that the stories they picked were much more out of the norm. These weren't really fairy tale, they were sort of classic stories. Both had their funny upbeat moments, but both had this very underlining dark tone throughout the whole thing. Even the setting for the narrators is a little off. It's just this dark, dark library. You don't even see the narrator. It's just these books sort of floating in the stained glass window with a candle in it. When I was a kid, I loved it. As an adult, I still love it. But heck, let's talk about them individually. You got The Wind in the Willows, which, when you get down to it, is another very strange book. Not that animals are walking and talking, that's not the weird part. It's the fact that everybody else in the world is human. And not just that, they're to scale. The rat is literally the size of a rat. That just looks so odd. But the rest of the story seems to follow pretty closely to the book. You got Toad, who's an extremist with anything. Anything that's new, anything that's hot, he's all over it. Mania, as the Brits like to call it. And he suddenly gets obsessed with motor cars. So he makes a really stupid deal with a guy named Weepy who, I don't know, I'm sure it's some sort of ethnic stereotype. In that he hands over Toad Hole in exchange for the car. But in court, Weepy tells a different story and says that Toad stole the car, which gets him thrown in jail and only his friends are able to save him. Molly and Rat are a lot of fun, Toad is enjoyably crazy, and even that horse gets a few good one-liners.
Then how did he get a motor car?
The only way a gentleman gets anything. The honest way.
And what is the honest way?
Haha, I thought you wouldn't know that, Governor.
I fucking love that line. Next, you have The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which in terms of story layout, even to the original book, is so odd to me, but I really love it because of that. Most of the short is just Ichabod Crane and how he interacts with the people in the town. He has a bully, he has a girlfriend, there's a little bit of a love triangle, and most of it is done through mime. You have Bing Crosby narrating it, but for the most part, people don't really talk. And yet so much character still comes out of them, including the fact that, something I never noticed as a kid, Ichabod is kind of a dick. I mean, when you look at what he wants to do, he wants to marry this woman and mainly get her money. I mean, he's already fantasizing her father being out of the picture.
Well, the old goat can't take it with him, and when he cuts out, that's where I cut in.
I think a lot of people, when they look back, think of Ichabod Crane as just this innocent that gets killed by the Headless Horseman. But no, he was actually sort of a bastard. Which for Disney is kind of interesting. It's one of the few times where you actually have sort of a jerk be your lead. In fact, you could make the argument that Brom Bones, though he's a bit of a bully, is much more of a good guy. I mean, he doesn't do anything really wrong, or at least not as wrong as Ichabod. And for all we know, maybe he'd make a better boyfriend, who knows? But of course the part everyone remembers is the built-up appearance of the Headless Horseman. By God, that laugh is cool. I think it's one of those rare times that a lot of kids found themselves both scared and laughing at the same time. The climax is a lot of fun that way. It's sort of like Evil Dead 2. In fact, I'd be shocked if director Sam Raimi didn't take a lot of the atmosphere and tone directly from this cartoon. It's just your classic ghost story with a classic ghost story ending. And the two seem to go actually pretty well together. Both take advantage of the fact that it's cinematic and they can get a lot of fun angles, and they also stick true to their stories, as well as taking some creative liberties. Whenever anyone thinks Wind in the Willow or Sleepy Hollow, these are usually the first two versions that come in mind, and that's probably not so bad. It's good to read the originals, of course, but these are pretty good adaptations. It's heavy on the dark, but also big on the laughs. Either one is great on its own, but back to back, they work just as good.
You can't reason with a headless man, I'm getting out of here.
Cinderella, every little girl's dream come true. After 6 films of not having a continuing story run all the way through, this was finally a return to the 3-act structure. Cinderella, the famous fairy tale, tells the story of a young woman who's been turned into a maid by her stepmother and her evil stepsisters. Her bunch of animal friends help her out, of course, and try to keep things jolly. But when the night of the ball approaches and she isn't able to go, her fairy godmother appears and gives her a dress and carriage to make it out there. I guess by this point it was trying to return to the roots of Snow White. You got the pretty damsel, you have the animal sidekicks, they have a softer, more realistic human being as the main star as opposed to a cuddly animal. And of course you have the evil, terrifying villains. I guess Cinderella is one of those that gets harped on a lot for being very anti-feminist. Just wait around, wish, and your dreams will come true. First of all, didn't Pinocchio start that? And second, I don't know, from a male point of view growing up, I never thought she was that bad. I always saw a lot of patience with her. I mean, yeah, I guess she never really did anything, but at the same time, the fact that she was willing to put up with so much and yet still find some happiness in her everyday life, there's gotta be some really good values in there. As a character, there isn't really too much else to her, but to be honest, the virtues I listed before, I think those are enough. The villain is great. I love that by simply having control over one person's life, this can be one of the great Disney baddies. The way she's animated, the way she stares, the way she smiles, she's a great one. The songs, of course, everybody knows, Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo and so forth. And the animation is sort of a nice return to those softer colors that were made popular in Snow White and Fantasia. One of my main problems again, though, is the prince. God, does he even get a line in this movie? His dad actually has more dialogue. In fact, the movie is much more about the dad wanting him to fall in love than him actually wanting to fall in love. Maybe taking an angle from the prince's point of view might have been more interesting. But maybe if you did, you'd see just how really twisted and kind of sick this story is. Hey, he found a woman strictly based on sight. Hey, he knew her for a few hours and then he decided she's the one. Hey, all she left is a shoe, and yet somehow that's going to determine which woman you're going to marry. Hey, coincidentally the shoe size can only fit one friggin' woman in the entire world, and thank God it just happened to be the one you fell in love with. Yeah, I guess that is a little screwed up. As the Disney films go, especially the ones that sort of use the traditional princessy formula, this one's okay. It's got some really good moments, some really good song sequences, and like I said, a really cool villain. But a lot of it also seems like filler. Just the animals sort of walking around, being goofy, having fun, when really you could have been spending that time developing some of the other characters. Like, oh, I don't know, again, the friggin' prince! But the artwork is pretty impressive too. Watching it again, I really like the scale that they give a lot of these houses and castles. They actually do make it seem rather massive. And this is before widescreen. It's the basic return to the classic fairy tale, and it does it pretty decently. And any problems it does have story-wise, I think you can attribute to just the time period and, well, the fact that it is a fairy tale. Well, a lot of them were just sort of written this way. I think it holds up okay. Not one of my personal favorites, but it's definitely pretty good.
Potrà rintracciarti! No! Presto, scappiamo!